Hey, hello out there, everybody. This is Founder Layroon with FGC, and I am going to be showing you how to use Fantasy Grounds for your first time. Maybe you just purchased it, maybe you just heard about it, or maybe even just played it once. I'm going to go through this for you so that it's much easier for you to understand how to get this thing up and running, how to check out the things that you invested in, and last but not least, how to set this thing up. So sit back and listen, and I will take you on a little trip through the Fantasy Grounds virtual tabletop software that we all know and love. So first of all, I'm going to be here at the launcher. I'm going to show you basically how I normally start up a session. And there are some other nuances here I'll explain. So this will assume that you have at least a sub and not just a demo account, or perhaps you have the standard license, or maybe even the more popular ultimate license amongst the DMs and game masters. So first thing is you select your rule set. In this case, I picked 5th edition rule set. I gave it a campaign name. I'm going to call this Overview of Fantasy Grounds. I just happen to put my username here as Layroon. And any extensions that you might want to use, you can load here. I don't advise using those right off the bat until you understand exactly what they do. But I am going to load a few here. One of them is called the Font Montserrat. And what this is a specific font that looks a little bit bigger so that you can see and both look at the screen and it's not so tiny. I'm also going to load a theme. This was created for our Founders Day that has happened about a month ago, and this is made by the community. And I'm going to also enable some fonts which might come into play later on during the demo. And I'm going to load this window saver in case I want to do this again. I don't have to find everything that I had open. And I'm also going to use this GM icon, which just changes the little icon in the chat window. So that should be good enough for now. Like again, you don't need all these extensions, and try not to use them too much or rely on them. So you want to make sure that you understand what they do before you start downloading them and using them. So the next step is I'm going to run test. So if you don't have an alias already, you want to generate one of those first. And this is only if you want to host. So if you're just going to play, you don't have to worry about this section. Or if you're just going to be by yourself and no one connecting to you. So I'm going to hit run test. And I get the success because I've already set up my computer for port forwarding. I've made an exception in my firewall so that Fantasy Grounds can be allowed to allow connections into my computer network. If you don't do that, no one will be able to connect to your table. I'm not going to describe in depth or detail on how to achieve this, but you can very well learn how to do this on your own. And FGC and the Fantasy Grounds official forums have a lot of support and a lot of experience and ideas on how to accomplish this. And not to mention, very soon there will be a newer edition of Fantasy Grounds. I think by January we'll have something looking pretty decent, and that will hopefully give us a round workabout for trying to get around this issue. But for right now, this is what we're going to deal with. Once I've done that, I'm going to go ahead and hit start. So as it's loading, I will let you know that Fantasy Grounds will take a while to load, especially if you have a lot of DLC or modules. So I have a ton of them. That's why it takes so long for mine to build and to load. So you want to make sure that you organize your Fantasy Grounds folders and try not to overload them with materials like I have. Hey Chris, how you doing? So I'm just going to go over some of these basic things with Fantasy Grounds. I know a lot of people out there are looking at it and they need some help. So I'm going to make a Fantasy Grounds overview that's going to help people get started. So here we have the beginning of the Fantasy Grounds setup. Now this comes up by default. If for some reason you don't want this to come up the next time you log in, you can click this little bubble here and this pop-up window will not come up. So this tutorial also assumes that not only do you have a license, but you have at least the core books. So here these links take you to the official Fantasy Grounds help and support. If you run into trouble, you can always come to these links. And I'm going to hit next here. And now this is where you load your modules. These are all your books, your supplements, your map packs, things like that. So I would like you to click on the 5e core rules, or if you don't own those, you can load the SRD and the basic rules. But I'm going to go ahead and load the core rules. I advise against not loading all of the rules, especially if you own them all. It's very hard on Fantasy Grounds. It takes way too much memory to load all those at once. So I'm going to go ahead and do 5e core rules. It usually takes about a minute or so to open that up. And while that's happening and we're waiting on that, I want to thank everybody for stopping by, and hopefully this will help you a little bit. So as you can see, it's loaded the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Player's version. The Player's version just adds a couple items, and it adds an Evil Cleric, and I think a Paladin, if I remember right. It loads the Monster Manual and the Player's Handbook Deluxe. I don't know if there's a Player's Handbook Standard, but the Player's Handbook Deluxe has all the artwork, all the different classes built into it, and it has a bunch of other add-ons that were created in the beginning. At one time, Fantasy Grounds had a separate pack where you were able to buy each class separately. So they've done away with that now. Now it's just one big book. So the Player's Handbook Deluxe, Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Monster Manual. If you own those 3 books, those are the core books. Those are the main books that you need. So if you need to, load any other campaign items, you can do that. And I will show you how to do that later. But right now, all I did was load the modules that I'm going to use, which are the core books. I'll close that. And I am going to click on that show on load. I don't want this to come up again. And I'm going to hit next. Now here you would load token modules. So if you own any token modules, or if you made your own pack somehow, if you learn how to do that, that's a way you could do this. I'm going to load the free letter tokens. Those are always handy. And then if you have any modules, which I have a ton of, you can go ahead and load them to here. And what I'm going to do is load a few that I've commissioned from, this would be our friend Bernardo Hasselman, a really good fantasy token maker. And he's kind of been doing this for a few years, and I'm trying to get him to get up on his feet and get some materials out there. So I'm going to go ahead and do a search because I have so many tokens that I honestly don't know how many I have or what I have. So I'm going to go ahead and look for some. So here I'm going to load this. This is fantasy tokens, and this has a bunch of collected tokens that I put together myself. I did not do the artwork, that was Bernardo, but I did put together the modules so I don't have to have them loaded loose or individually. So I went ahead and loaded that. And I think that's good. That'll give us a good start. And what that does is it puts more token libraries in your tokens banner. So when you open up this banner, you will have all these different packs here. And these come from the books or any sort of rule set that you might have. But in this case, I'm going to load up the fantasy tokens, and in here I can double click on this bag, and this allows you to access these folders. Now if you want to go back, there's an arrow right here, and that takes you back to the top level of the folders. But I'm going to go ahead and go back to Fantasy Token. And then I made little subfolders in here so that I can kind of have an idea of what's in them. So here I have my commissioned Winter World tokens. And if you want to see them up closer, you can actually zoom in and you get a better view of these. And these things are beautiful. I mean, these are all themed for Arctic and snow and cold environments, but it is incredible what the work he does. So this is an Underdark series in which these are something I commissioned as well. And these are things that you can use in your campaigns if you have your own. And these are also really nice three-dimensional top-down looking. Some people prefer the pogs. And pogs are like these rounded circles. And that's because they're a little bit easier to see on most of the battle maps. So that's another method and much cheaper and easier. But I really enjoy the three-dimensional top-down ones. I made another folder in which I've taken all the assets that I can find that are related to oceanic adventuring. And I've just went through and found all these different tokens that would be useful or that would be very fun to use in an ocean-based campaign. So you have dolphins and different sigils and maps and all kinds of stuff. Here's some Sahu again. There's just all kinds of assets here. I got a crab here, it looks like. A swarm of bats. Just anything, sharks, anything that might add to the flavor and to the color of the actual campaign. So now I'm going to hit the back button. And any of these token packs you can get into, and they will have any given amount of collections depending on what you have. So here's a couple gnomes. Here's some dwarves, things like that. So that's how you access your tokens. So you'll start off with a few, but if you really want to open up more, you click modules. And this will take you into the subfolder where all your modules are. And you can activate them from here. So this is where your modules are stored. Or excuse me, your tokens. Now the next thing I'm going to do is hit next. This takes you to the options menu. And where this points you is to the options here. So when you click options, it'll pop up that window. So I'll do that now. So it takes you to here, which is your options menu for Fantasy Grounds. If you close this by accident, or you want to bring it back up, you can just click setup here. And that will bring the campaign setup menu back to page 1. So that'll help people if you need to, take the chance on something that you would want to, have some extra help. Maybe you would even have a setting or two that you want to take care of. That would be where you would basically have something that you'd want to try. Okay. So this was a test. So I will take heed, Chris, and I will turn the music down. So that'll help a little bit. Is that better, Chris? I hope it is. Yep. Okay. So back to the lesson. I'm going to now continue, and what's going to happen is I'm going to go over a few of these settings. I'm not going to go through all of them. They'll be very confusing, and I think that most people would agree that a lot of this stuff doesn't mean a whole lot to you until you really get to understand Fantasy Grounds. But I will show you a few things. So one, if you want to change this background, you can. So in this case, I changed it to the Founders Day weekend decal, which is custom, or you can turn it off completely. So I went ahead and turned that on, and I'm going to bring up the dice tower. So you need to click on chat, show GM roles on, and table dice tower on. And you'll see this little dice tower. So I'm going to right click on it and unlock it. I'm going to bring it over closer to the dice. And I'm going to lock this. So I want it closed. So when I want to use the dice tower, I can drop the dice in there and it will do a hidden roll. So I'm going to unlock this. And this will allow me to adjust this window size. I can also clear it by right clicking and clearing this with this eraser. Or if you have too much text, you can do a right/clear command, and that'll do it as well. So I'm going to right click on this and lock it. And I will also go ahead and take these options and go down here. And you can change different settings, like how things are brought into Fantasy Grounds, how they're displayed, what the percentage of your scale for your tokens. I always put it on 100%. Effect icon size, you can go with large or medium or small. I can go with standard. And then I would like to show you this. You have attack, fumble and criticals table. If you turn that on, you have to load a table. And what it does is if you roll a certain number, like a 1 or a 20, it will call up another table, which will give you some secondary effects or outcomes. It can be fun sometimes, but sometimes it can really unbalance the game. So there's a lot of different settings in here, but this map diagonal distance, I definitely set that to variant. So when you're moving on a map, it doesn't move too far. Because if you can normally move 30 feet, either left to right or up and down, if you move diagonally without that on, you're going to be moving 45 feet. So you got to keep the Pythagorean theorem in mind if you don't use that. So every other square would be considered 10 feet. So I just went ahead and enabled the decal image, and I just changed and added the dice tower. I think that's enough to get you started. But as time goes on, you're going to wonder what all this stuff does. And I might cover a few things, but not too much. So here we go. I'm going to close that. Now the next thing I want you to do is go to the library. And I already have these books loaded. But if you open the library and you don't see anything, then you need to enable some modules. Another thing I'm going to do is show you how to expand this menu to the right. If you click all, that is going to make this so that you have access to all the different icons and the different libraries and such in Fantasy Grounds. So when you're exploring something you've just purchased, this is a good place to do that. Also, you can customize this view if you need to. I'm going to click on modules. And this is how you used to enable modules the old way, is come through here and load up something. So I'm going to load a module that I haven't even looked at yet. Let's look at Salt Marsh, or maybe even something. Let's see. Yeah, let's do Salt Marsh. It's not too old. So I just did a search, and this has a player's guide, which adds more backgrounds and such. There is the Ghost of Salt Marsh adventure itself, which is getting ready to load. And then there's the Salt Marsh notice board. What this does is a third-party product. It adds more adventures. So you have all these notice boards, and you can go through here. And there's all these notes that talk about different missions. And these are for DMs so that they have some story ideas if they have writer's block or something like that. So these are kind of cool. These would be in addition to the normal rules. And then I'm going to load up one of my favorite map packs that I have been using off and on for several months now. And that would be the Ship Starter. So Ship Starter is a map pack created by Chris. And he happens to be in the chat right now, Chris McDermott of Game Tile Warehouse. We know him as Map Hatter in our community in FGC. So I'm going to type Ship Starter. And actually I just use ship. And this is a map pack. So I'm going to hit load. and that appears down here in the ship's map pack. And what this is an additional map pack that is themed for oceanic adventure. So I thought that'd go very well with Salt Marsh and some of the supplemental material that I have here. So I'm going to go ahead and open up just one image out of this for now. And if you buy the map pack, what you get is an organized list of different map images. There's a thumbnail for the actual module. And he has this handy ship starter map selection. So that's very handy if you want to know what's in the maps, in the map pack itself. So you can choose these by clicking on one of these pins. So this is very cleverly put together. And one thing I really like was this, one of my favorite ones is this Kraken, and then also this ship-to-ship skirmish. Now this is a huge map, so when I load it, it's going to be ginormous, but it is beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and load that. So when I click that, I mean, that's not too bad. That's a pretty good, decent size. And I've already loaded everything I have in the library. If you want to look up some rules in the rule books while I'm here, you click on one of the books. And I'm going to hit the reference manual. And when you click on here, you can get all the different reference materials just like you had the book. So this would be very handy so that you guys can basically look at the index. Here they talk about character creation. And if you are going to create characters, please scroll down here and look at the advised Fantasy Grounds steps for creating characters. I'm not going to go cover character creation, but if you're getting ready to do so, please follow these instructions or come on over to Fantasy Grounds College. We'll help you out. It's fantasygroundscollege.net. Right on the front page is our mission statement and what we do for the community, and also our direct link to our Discord. So that's what this is all about, is showing you guys how to use the software. So get ready to use the reference manuals when you want to look things up. So for example, if I want to look up languages, I can start typing the word language, double click here. Here's a page about it, shows the fonts and talks about the different languages that are available for the standard 5th edition. You click this little pin up here, you have this pop-out page. And what's really nice about this is that you will be able to have a quick link or reference. So if you wanted to do this later on when you're building your character, you can drag it to the hotkeys. So it's a handy shortcut. So I'm going to close that, and there I can bring it right back up. So it's very handy. So try to use the reference manuals if it comes with one. Now, not everything has a reference manual, but most of them do. So we're going to go ahead and close that. And I'm going to close the library. And here is the map that I brought up. If you look at that, it's very detailed. These will only get better once Unity comes out. There'll be a higher resolution, and you will be able to see a lot more of the detail and the color variation. But this looks pretty good. It looks like a cannon or two is shot through here, and it looks like a mess. It looks like a big battle went on here. So it's kind of cool how this turned out. Also, I'm going to click on the combat tracker. So this is where all your combatants will go. And when anyone connects to the table, they'll come up here. So what I'm kind of showing you is how to set up your table. Now you don't have to set it up this way. This is just a suggestion. Now for the map itself, I'm going to shrink it just a little bit. It's a little big, although I wish I can show it full screen. I kind of can. Let me see. You got this arrow up here, and you can actually bring that further and kind of use this as your desktop, which is kind of a cool thing. And then you can also go full screen, So if you just want to see that and run your combat in the combat tracker, you could do that too. So this is a really cool way to get a good idea of what your artwork looks like. So I'm going to shrink that down, shrink it down again. Now I need to add a grid. This is something that you must do to a map if it doesn't have one on it already. And even if it has one painted on it, you still have to put a grid on it. So doing that is right-clicking on the map, clicking layers, click this square set grid, and I'm going to use this port here as a point of reference. So that's roughly about, I think about 48 is pretty dead nuts. So it's 50 to 60, but I think 48 looks really good. That also allows for the thickness of the line. So this is a nice little setting for this. Looks pretty good to scale. All right. And now what I'm going to do is show you a couple things that you can do with these maps. So let's say you were on this ship, but you haven't boarded this one yet, or that this particular boat wasn't quite there yet. Maybe you want to stage this battle later. So what I'm going to do is mask this whole photo. So you do that by clicking layers again, and you click enable mask. And this is stuff you do before your game starts. And let's say you're going to use this side for your players. So all I'm going to do is unmask this area. And what this is basically a mask in which the DM can only see this grayed out area. On the player side, it'll be dark. It'll be black, basically. I might free that up. And if you want to, instead of doing rectangles, you can hold the shift key and you can actually trace the outline. So I'll show you that a little bit. So that's just to show you that you don't have to just stick with squares. And basically that's how you work with maps in Fantasy Grounds. Now if you're going to use this map later and you don't want to have to look for it, you can also bookmark it. So I stuck that down here. And I'm going to rename it. So this says map. This is a large map, but this is a ship starter Pirates at War. So that's fine. But if you want to change the title so that your players don't have the generic title or the original title, you can put whatever you want over here and you disguise this. And basically when you share that with people, that they will only see the title that you made up. So I'm just going to give it another generic title, Battle at Sea. And once that comes up and it's shared, when you right click and you share this sheet with your friends or your players, this will be what they see here, and they'll see this title. They will not see this title here. That is for the DM or for the developer. So that is that. Let's see. Yes. Roll for fun. It's definitely one of the map packs. This is just something that I'm showing people so that they can learn how to access some of the things in Fantasy Grounds. Now here's a ship. Now I'm going to open up the module. So I already have it open in the library. And here's the adventure itself. And it has a reference manual. So you can actually go through here and go through it page by page and read it just like you had the book. But when you do this Fantasy Grounds version, it's broken down modularly. So here I'm going to filter it to just the Ghosts of Saltmarsh. and it breaks us down into chapters. There's an introduction, tells you how to use the book, how to run the adventures, and some credits. So if you read this introduction, that's a good thing. You want to do that so you kind of understand what's going on. And here's an introduction photo. It's really nice. Kind of like that. So this kind of gives you more of a flavor for the game. And then I can hit this arrow, and it tells you how to use it. And how to run the adventure. Gives you the credits. And that's the beginning of the actual module. So now if I go to chapter 1, so you go to chapter 1, and there's Salt Marsh. And this talks about the city and the politics and all those sort of things. So you can kind of linearly go through here, or you can pick and choose what you want to work with in your campaign. I'm not going to go too much further into campaign setup. I just want you to know how to access your materials. So you go to library, and then you can read with the reference manual, and you can access these sections here from these banners. So this is how you do it. So that is how that goes. Now you have some NPCs. Some of these are from the monster manual and some of the other books I have loaded. But if you want to see what comes with the actual fantasy grounds, you can do that. And also there's a boat template. So if you want to create a ship, you can do so. Here's a template. It's very rude, right? And very rudimentary right now, but you definitely can create a boat if you need to, so that you can keep track of how much damage it takes and that. And I think in the Salt Marsh, it actually has some statistics and ways to do this. So I'm going to go to encounters. Just a sec. Yep. To Salt Marsh. And I think, if I remember right, yeah, there's the main deck. Okay, those are just NPCs. But you can basically navigate through the ship, and you have different sections of the ship that have a stat block. And then you'll be able to attack that portion of the boat, like the hull, the mast, all those different sections of the boat. And it can have its own armor class, its own defenses, things like that. So I believe in the library, when you go to this Salt Marsh, you go to this reference manual, or maybe it's the NPCs. Let's see. Yeah, here's a blocked door. Okay, it doesn't really have anything but stats for the blocked door. Let's see. Here is a, let's see, there's a charred door. So here's a door that's been burned, so maybe we can apply that to one of these doors here. Let's see, there's a crossbow door. So here's a door that has a loaded crossbow in it. Here's a false door. And here's a galley. So here's the whole ship. Gargantuan vehicle unaligned. So this gives you the stat block for the galley. So you can use that for one of these. And it has a ram, the controls, the hull. It talks about the movement. And if you wanted to, you can unlock this. And you can link these to the ship itself. So these are components of the main boat. So that would be something you could do. And that allows you to say, okay, here's the ship. This is the stats for the hull, for the main piece of it. It's got 500 hit points, so it'd take quite a bit to sink it. But then it has components that you can add also. So that is a kind of a handy thing. And I know there's some weapons and armor and things like that that you can see. Here's a heavy door. There's probably a harpoon or some kind of weapon, maybe ballista. So you have all that here that you can use. So there's some oars. You know, you have a longship. So for instance, here's a longship stats. Here's the helm, the oars, and the sails. So I know Chris has a longship in the module itself. So we can go to the actual maps and images section. And I'm going to filter it out to the ship starter section. And you can go to this panel here. I showed you this earlier. And here's a Viking longship. So, in a sense, you could have this statted out. So, what you would do is go ahead and put this in the map and get it gridded. So I'm going to put a grid on it, and I'm going to use this stuff as kind of a reference, just so I have it to the right scale. And I think 25 looks pretty good. Let's see. Well, yeah, I think around there, maybe. Yeah, 48. Yeah, I think 25 looks good. Just so I have a little bit more room on the boat. And then you have the sails. So depending on how many sails you would have, you would add that on to your encounter. So I'm going to build an encounter. So we're going to call this a longship. So I'm going to make a new section. Okay. So here's the longship. And now I'm going to make the actual encounter. So this is your Viking longship. Now what I'm going to do is, here's the vehicle. Here's the helm. Here's the sails, if it has any. And the oars. So these are the components. And then they would each have their own hit points. And you can adjust those if you need to. There's no experience points or anything, but you could set a value, like if you repair the ship, or maybe you'd sink it, maybe you'd give it some sort of value for experience point. So you can do that, and then you'd link this right to the ship itself. Now let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So let's see, that's what? Let's see, there's 40 and 38 oars. So unlock this at 38 if you wanted to do it like that. I think that'd be a real pain, but it's a way you can keep track of how many are still working. And then you have this here. And then I would take this long ship and I would link these. So you have the helm. You have the oars. So let's do that. And then you have the sails. So that kind of keeps them all together, nice and tidy. And then you can even put the crew here. So let's make a little bit of a crew. So I'm going to bring this over and I'm going to basically break up break out a crew here. Just a really quick thing. So I'm going to close that and click all. And I'm going to go ahead and make an encounter. So this is the ship. Now I'm going to make the crew. So this will be the Viking ship crew. And now I'm just going to look up some generic commoners and Vikings and such. Okay. So we can just say that these commoners are going to be the crew members. You can also add some fighters and some other specialists in here. But just for the sake of speed, I'm going to put this commoner in here. And you got to imagine that every one of these oars is probably manned, or most of them. So there's probably, what, 38? So at least 30 commoners. And then not to mention there's a captain and some of the elite crew members and maybe even a few slaves. So you'd basically make that up here. And I would make this crew neutral so they're not starting off evil right off the bat. So the crew would be linked here, but it'd also be linked on the back of the ship. So then if you had any parcels or anything else, you can link it there. So now you have the ship and the crew. And if you want to place the crew, you can very tediously go through here and place them where they're at on the ship ahead of time. Or you can just send them to the combat tracker. So hit the down arrow. And then drag them over from here. And then arrange them how you like. So it's basically up to you how much time and effort you want to put into it. But it's a good usage for ships. So Saltmarsh adds the ship sections and the properties and some of the rules. So if you go to the Saltmarsh thing here and you go to the reference manual, and you can get down into the indexes. Here's the ships of the sea. It talks about the basic stat blocks. And then it gives you the examples. It gives you some hazards. It even has a table. So here is a table. And here's a hazard type. And here's a hazard DC challenge rating. So what this does is when you roll on these, it basically rolls on these other tables. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the hazard chance. So this is if you're sailing and you come across something. So it says nothing happens today. Nothing happens today. So I'm going to change the output to chat so it doesn't keep creating story entries. Nothing. A whole bunch of nothing going on for days. Okay, So it says nothing happens today, then it says DC equals. So I think that may be a little bit broken. Let's see. You have to roll a 20. So let's just say I rolled a 20. So then you would roll the hazard type. And then you would get the hazard type. And then you would roll, like, you know, is it fog, fire? Is it crew conflict? And then it tells you what to do in the situation with the story entries. So basically, these tables help you kind of spice up the adventure. And they also provide you with alternative rules and how to deal with it. So there's a Fantasy Grounds crib sheet for the DM. And what this does is it kind of breaks this down into sections. And I really appreciate this because for the first chapter, you're going to worry about the sinister secret and just the stuff in there. Then when you're done, you can go to chapter 2 or part 2 if you want, and that would be another thing you would look at. So this is a really cool way to organize the information. And then here are the main map. So there's the town of Saltmarsh with all the links in it. What you could do here is this longship. You can say that, here's a player's map. You can say this longship is pulling into port. So you can link this longship here. So as you're arriving, you would see all this stuff. And you'd probably dock the boat somewhere in here and disembark, or maybe you land here and invade the beach or whatever it is in your adventure. So there's a lot of things you can do with Fantasy Grounds. There's a lot of linking back and forth. And once you understand that, it makes it a whole lot easier. So this is just an overview of how you can use Fantasy Grounds. You can also change the mood. So maybe you stay till nighttime and you can make the night fall. And then you can also change the color of your dice. So I can change it to more of a blue color to be more thematic with water, or maybe green with seaweed or something like that. So it's just a matter of taste, time, and how much you put into it. So I think that we'll call that a day. Hopefully that helps you guys out there a little bit, and this will make it a little easier for you guys when you're first starting with Fantasy Grounds. There is a lot to learn and a lot to digest. I kind of just blew through all those, but hopefully that'll help you. And one other thing is when you go to exit Fantasy Grounds, I want you to do a // as a command, type save, and hit enter, and that'll save your campaign. And the way to properly exit is to hit the X and return to launcher. I can't stress that more. That makes a difference when it comes to ruining your campaign or ruining your, your basic, your campaign settings and stuff. You might actually corrupt them. So make sure that you don't get messed up and you don't want to lose your work. A lot can happen in 5 minutes. So Fantasy Grounds is supposed to save every 5 minutes. Well, I save it when I think about it because I don't trust it. So anyhow, have a good night, everyone. Have a good weekend. And I hope to see you around in the community. And if you're watching later on the video on demand, or perhaps you are watching on YouTube later, this will be put into the archives. You kind of use as a basic setup type thing. And we've been going for about an hour, so I think that's pretty good. If anybody wants any additional help, or perhaps you want to join our community, it's fantasygroundscollege.net. You can do a Google search. There's many ways to find us. We have Twitter, Twitch, Reddit. I mean, it's all over the place. So hopefully you guys will be able to get some help and get your game started. I'm going to take off. Good night, you guys. And thanks for supporting us and watching the show. Thank you.